Hey guys, welcome to episode 3 of the podcast Little Girls Aren't Taught This. I am your host, Lydia McCartney, self-love coach, and this week we have a special guest, Devika Wood. Devika is a multi-award winning founder and she featured on Forbes 30 under 30. She's a trauma survivor and now she essentially uses her story to advocate for women's mental health and trauma support. She's the co-founder of I Am Arla, so if you followed me on Instagram, you will know that I became a trauma coach for that platform, which is just absolutely amazing. And essentially the platform is a space where women come together and they can receive support for the healing process after trauma, and they get support for mind, body, soul, and it's just making these issues spoken about, and it's just making them normalized, I guess, in the sense that women feel like they're not alone and they can heal with the support of other women. So this episode is one that felt so right to do because in the light of everything that's happened with the Sarah Everard and the Meghan Markle last week, it really felt like this was a conversation that was insightful and needed and will hopefully just, I don't know, just help you process how you're feeling, I guess, because everybody will be having opinions and everybody will be feeling a certain way about these things. So for me, it was just really important to bring someone like Devika on to discuss this, who has not only experienced sexual violence herself and trauma herself, but is also now an advocate and, you know, speaks up strongly about these things. So I thought it was a really interesting conversation. So let's get stuck in. So hello Devika, thank you for joining me on the podcast. I know it was a little last minute, but I just felt in the light of the week that we've had and, you know, what you do as well, it was just so relevant to come on and talk about it and hold space. So just introduce yourself to the listeners, who you are and what is it that you do.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here as your first guest. Such an honour. Go you. I'm Devika Wood. I'm one of the co-founders of I Am Arla, which is a platform for women who've experienced abuse and trauma, helping them with their mental health. I don't know what else to say. I am just really excited to be here to discuss some really exciting topics with you.
Well, that's how we come to, so just so the viewers can piece how we know each other. I am the trauma coach on Arla, and I remember when I spoke to my following about it last year, and I was like so honoured. It was like such a big thing to be asked to be part of like such an amazing community. And I think the ethos of everything that Arla stands for is pretty much everything that we've been feeling this week. So how are you finding this week?
Oh, you know what? I was having a think about this, and there's been like a really horrible energy that's been going around. I've been feeling really deflated these last like couple of days. And I don't know if I would never say it was directly against that, but I think there's this energy and this air of so many women coming together and voicing out around just the utter shame that the country is just not giving us the respect and the rights that we deserve to have. Mm-hmm. And it's just coming across so apparent from everyone on social media, to my friends, to the conversations we're having. It's just a really, really negative energy, and really struggling to find that like inner peace and positivity to come through this week.
Yeah. And it's like, the thing for me is like, you know, the bizarre thing though, Devika, is like, I feel like we're having so many conversations about it, and we are, you know, we're seeing so many things on social media, and for me it feels like we're unearthing secrets, but a part of me feels like it's so normal. Like, I know for me it's so normal, but then actually it's quite shocking that this is the first time we're openly talking about it, because it's things that we've experienced. I know personally I have, you know, sexual harassment, being catcalled, being touched in clubs without even asking for it, men just feeling like they can do those things. Like, I've been in situations with clubs and men have just come up to me and stuck their tongue in my mouth and proceeded to kiss me. And all of these things are so normal.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that this feels like the first time we're speaking out. I don't know if that's just me. Do you get a sense of that?
I feel like it's the first time we're getting proper air around this. And I feel like it's becoming a movement, which I think in some ways there's some positivity that's coming out of such a negatively damaging and like terrible situation for Sarah and her family, and just the life that's been taken away. We shouldn't have to take a life away to create a movement and to create a topic and a conversation. And the sad part is, I was reading out, I mean, since there's been these statistics flying around, which I think is why there's so much bad energy in the air. But like, apparently since her murder, there's been 6 other women that have been murdered in the last week at the hand of men, including one little girl that's been murdered. That's just one statistic that's been going out. I read somewhere else, because I was just looking at this and I was like, this is appalling. Did you know 35% of women have experienced physical or sexual violence by a partner? 93% have said that they have experienced sexual harassment at one point in their lifetime. All these statistics have been coming out, and I'm just sitting here thinking, you're right, this is inherently within our society, and yet now the conversation is happening. And I was thinking back, actually, crazily, I was looking back at 2 years ago. I did a panel for Women Means Business for the Telegraph, and I was on a panel talking about my experience as a founder for my last company, and raising funds in an all-male world, and experiencing sexual harassment. The CNBC picked up my story at the event, and it went live on a story that went all over Google. And my friends contacted me and they were like, you've got a story up for CNBC about sexual harassment. Like, are you okay? What's going on? And I was like, no, I was just talking about the fact that when I was raising funds, I was sexually harassed by investors who said terrible things and put me in positions that made me feel really uncomfortable if I would take their money. And I talked about it, and what happened? Nothing. There was a story about it, nothing. And it just proves your point exactly, 100%.
And I think, I feel like for me, that's part of the frustrations that I've been trying to make sense of, I think, the past few days, is there's been frustrations about what happened and how we are within society, like how we're treated and objectified and sexually objectified. But then I think also there's been another side of me that's just had this frustration. I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. And I realized over the weekend, it's that frustration that I feel let down already, that I don't really think anything's going to change. And I hope it does. But I feel like women have been experiencing this for so long, and so many women have died, and we've had just so many cases like this, and it's just never changed. And I think I've just felt like angry about that over the weekend. Like, why do we have to make a movement? Why did she have to die? Why did all of this have to happen for us to finally be having these conversations?
Yeah, it's sad that inherently there seems to be but I mean, the last year there's been so many movements going on, right? From like where we are now, Black Lives Matter before. Sadly, I think everything's been brewing, and there's been lots of frustrations and anger and contentment at the way that there is little to none equality existing in our societies. And I think it's taken these kind of moments that are kind of pivotal in things to crack. And hopefully it's going to spark something that changes drastically how society treats equality, gender equality, violence against women, racial equality. But you're right, there's that feeling of just, I think, a bit of that heavy feeling that is it actually going to move forward? And you look at the bills that are going through the Commons. I think I was reading that there was a bill that was put through 300 pages long, and there was nothing written about anything to do with gender violence and like supporting women and changing legislation. So some peers, I think the Labour Party put in changes and amendments to it, focusing on changing the way that misogyny is faced and the punishable crimes for misogyny, and also around stalkers. So the fact that stalkers can then go into legislation to be, I think it's a crime put into it. So I think there's all these things that are trying to be pushed through now, but it's just such a shock that nothing seems to be taken seriously until something really bad happens.
I done a live on my Instagram and I spoke about, one of the other things I think is frustrating is I felt like last week like you were saying, we've had all these movements and I'm just tired of seeing people die for there to be a movement like George Floyd, Caroline Flack. Like these people are more than a movement. Like I want to see change and I want to see policy and conversations and uncomfortable conversations. And I think last week with the Meghan Markle situation, just the whole of last week, we seen racism questioned and denied, and we see mental health minimized of a woman. And I was like, what have we actually learned from Caroline Flack and the Black Lives Matter and, mental health matters? Have we actually learned anything? Or is it becoming now when something happens, it's like that rush behind social media that people are constantly resharing information on social media, but is anything being done behind the scenes? And I think for me, that's where my frustration came with the Not All Men movement. And I was like, Sarah deserves better than this movement. Like, she deserves more than that, because it's not good enough. And it's not just, for me, it's so much more than, like you were saying before with Parliament. These are the conversations that we need to be having, and we need to begin to find the voice to speak up and challenge people. And I just don't want that momentum to go when it goes off Instagram.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that happens. I think even with the Black Lives Matter, this is the problem with movements, is that it gains a lot of traction and people are talking about it, and there is like passion behind it, and it is everywhere, but it becomes yesterday's chip paper, and it's something that then goes into this pot that then has no focus, and life seems to regain normality. And normality is not where we need to be, because normality is leading people to be killed and murdered. And there's something severely wrong with what normality looks like. So like I've been thinking a lot recently is about what can we actually do to create this from not being a movement? What can we put in place where people are not continuously now talking about it's a women's safety issue, but actually it's a male violence issue? How can we change that narrative? How can we change legislation? What is it that we all need to be doing to put actions in place so this doesn't die down as a movement and also doesn't kill another woman? That's what I want to understand, what we can do as women, as society, and have men included in those conversations, rather than saying it's not all men. Well, it is all men if you're complicit with being silent. How can we be involved?
And that was, I was just going to say to you then, I was going to ask you what your perspective on the Not All Men movement is. So like, I've seen this boiling up on social media from the moment it was announced that they'd found a body, and she hadn't even been named or anything, but I began to see this hashtag gain a momentum. And for me, it felt like, in a way, we were taking the focus off the violence against women, like you've just said, and again, blanket protecting certain males. So essentially what it was doing for me was certain men were distancing themselves and being allowed to step back from that movement and actually step back from the violence. And then the other thing that really just, I guess, left me speechless was the fact that it was a police officer. So if we're saying it's not all men, who is deciphering who is the nice men out there? And I think that's really dangerous, because there's already so many misconceptions around the men who commit violence and the men that we should be afraid of, and how these stories play out in society. And you'll know, and I know, that it is the person that you go to sleep next to in the night. It is the person who's the father of your children who are the highest rate of perpetrators against women. It's not the men that jump out on us in the bushes that we should be afraid of. So for me, the Not All Men movement just felt, I was really angry and resistant towards it, to be honest, and I just had to vocalise it. And it was well received, which is quite interesting. But what is your perspective on that movement and the hashtag and everything that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think I loved I loved your perspective on it, and I loved the fact that, like, like you spoke out about it. I think you're right. It was a protective mechanism that men put in to try and separate themselves from being involved in that conversation. It's a normal, it's a response, and it makes me really angry. It's a response that is always heard from men when women talk about abuse or trauma, or men are this in a relationship, or we always talk about the fact of like the violence, and men always go, well, it's not all men like that. Stop men hating. And
the one is, well, I'm at risk walking home too because of knife crime, and I'm like,
oh my God. And it just really annoys me that a response to a woman saying, this man gaslighted me, or, this man was abusive to me, or men are abusive, or men are murderers, is, well, it's not all men. But if you look at the statistics, unfortunately, 93% of crimes committed, or men, is men committing crimes in the United Kingdom, which is
it's like 90% of women have known the perpetrator before the incident. So it was like, so what it felt like for me when this movement come about and we were seeing it is like, are we just ignoring the statistics? Because that's where it becomes really dangerous, in my opinion, is when we're actually ignoring the statistics and the facts, and we're sheltering, and we're essentially just giving permission slips to certain men of, yeah, we know it's not you. Well, how do we know that? Because the statistics are saying very differently. And that's where we actually are heightening the risk towards women, if we are playing off this narrative that the nice guys are the guys that we can trust.
Exactly. And you can't say not all men just so you can account for that 1% that didn't do something. It just doesn't make sense as a narrative. None of this makes sense from a narrative perspective. The whole narrative needs to change. And I think this has been spoken about a lot, which is around, woman has been raped is what you've seen, or woman has been murdered. Man's murdered a woman. That's where the narrative should be completely changing. And for some reason, it's continuously being perpetrated against the woman being seen as the victim, or there's a reason why that woman's been in that situation. There's a reason why a woman's been murdered or raped. And that narrative around the fact of when you have, for example, a typical response to women that have been in abusive relationships is, why did she stay? Why did she stay with that abusive man? Or when a woman's been raped, why is she wearing those clothes? What is it, what was she wearing when she was out that night? What state was she in? Was she intoxicated? All of these narratives is perpetrating an image of, well, it's not all men, and therefore its majority of the responsibility falls with the woman. And this case is completely redefined all of that narrative, because that gorgeous woman, innocent lady, Sarah, did everything she possibly could to be safe and do what was right for her, and put herself into a situation where she walked home, and it was a police officer that has murdered her. So the whole narrative has taken a spun on its head, and now there's no way that they can put a rebuttal on this and turn it on the woman. I think that's where this movement has just suddenly become big.
Yeah. And also, one of the interesting things that I was pondering, I think it was yesterday, and I was a bit unsure how to speak out about it, but I did notice it in terms of last week, because I think last week, if we look at it if we take an outside perspective on it and look at it for what it is, there was a lot that we saw last week in terms of women, the media, the power, how they're put into certain brackets, and depending how they're viewed by the media and by males, is how then they're spun. And we seen Meghan, that was gaslighted, and she's been gaslighted for years by the media. But we seen language used describing her like a villain and a liar, and she's bitter. And then we seen the Sarah, and how she's, she was a victim, which obviously she was. But the point I'm making is, don't you feel like women are bracketed into two? It's like we only have two ways we can go. We're either completely innocent and we're viewed as an angel and we've done everything right, and that's when people want to listen, or we're villainized, and it's like, well, what did you do? Well, what could you have done different? Well, actually, you don't fit into the expectations that we've set of what an innocent woman is. So I just noticed that, but I've not actually said anything about it. So what do you think on that? Have you ever noticed anything like that in the media?
Yeah, 100%. I think there is a serious issue with my dog right now. So I'm just going to stop. This is the work from home situation, isn't it? You have to cut this bit out of the podcast. So I think with the way that women are portrayed, and like you said, the categorizing of women into two kind of separate brackets is a classic example of the narrative that surrounds women and what we are constantly in a kind of, I would hate to say it, but a failing battle. It's almost feels like, even when I was sort of founding my company and an entrepreneur that was successful in my own right, in the sense of I was pitching money, I was building a company, I had employees, I was doing something socially and good. It was a care company. And even if I was speaking out about mental health, because I thought I had a responsibility with a platform to be able to support other women that had survived abuse or experienced mental health, and try to show people that not all entrepreneurs and people that you see in the spotlight who are in senior positions and leadership positions have got their shit together, because I had so far got my shit together. It was just, in my head, it was utter chaos. But no one has. No. But I wanted women to like just have that, young girls to realize that you can do anything, but nothing you see is always true. And I was always attacked by people, my shareholders, by like board members saying, do not show your vulnerability. Don't be showing your mental health. Like, don't do this, don't do that. You're looking weak. You are weak. Just shut up and look pretty. All these kind of comments that were coming out at me. Whereas my counterparts, my male founder counterparts, if they were talking about feeling suicidal or had mental health issues, they were brave. They were really powerful men for coming out and speaking out, and they were brave soldiers for doing it. And, they'd raised the same amount of money as me. Oh, good on them. Well done. But I was classified as that 2% of women that had raised funds. And it was like, oh, well, how did she do that? How did she do that? Like, what's going on there? She got like, what? And it was always this narrative that I was never able to ever be ahead of the critics, because I was in this bracket that people would see me as, which is where women sit. It's a bracket they get put into.
Yeah. And I think, when you start going into these realms of like social political issues and speaking out and having a voice and being a woman who's like, fuck no, like I'm not taking it anymore, is when you really, that is heightened, how the misogyny and just the continuation of bashing, that you just feel it so much. And I think for me, speaking out about these issues has felt slightly vulnerable. And I was speaking to a client about this, and I was like, it feels vulnerable for me. And I was like, the reason why it feels that way is because I know. And the point was proven on when I put that post up on Sunday. Straight away, I had an entitled, chauvinistic, uneducated male come onto the post talking about knife crime, telling me that I need to be more diverse at what I'm talking about. And I was like, this is it. Straight away, I put one post out that is educated, states facts, states like really good to the point, and already it's like, we don't want to hear that. Like, you need to know your place and just be quiet and continue to talk about woo-woo self-love. And I was like, no, fuck off now. I'm not here for that anymore, thank you. I'm going to speak up for the masses of women. But the saddest thing that I've seen this week is to see women bashing women, and women falling into the traps of the patriarchal society that we live in. And I just feel sad that, how can you not see it? Like, they must have experienced it. And I just think, how can you just say the things that you're saying knowing that you're a woman? Have you seen any of that on your social media? Or
Well, if I'm really honest, this week I've really stayed away from social media, because it's been too much, and it's been something that I've been really struggling with. There's there's been so much noise, and there's been so many comments just everywhere on so many topics. That's why I was saying that there's this heavy heart that I've been feeling of like, I just don't want to see another. I know maybe it sounds like I'm taking myself out of it, but I think social media can be really, really negative, and it can have these places where you can kind of go into this hole of just, oh my God, I don't know. I feel like I'm in this kind of like rabbit hole and I can't get out of it. And there's this negativity around me, and it can be a really damaging place because, like you said, you're thrown into this like arena of just views and energy and points that, like, most of it is just, it can be so damaging. And I don't know how you felt about it, because I mean, obviously, as someone that's like, you know, social media is your platform, I'm always interested to understand how people like yourself as like a coach, and how you kind of detach from that, because it can be so easy just to be like pulled into it. How do you kind of take yourself out from it?
You know, for me, it's like I don't really get involved in a lot of stuff. Like, I have opinions and I have the conversations behind the scenes, and it's just like Black Lives Matter, for example. Well, I wasn't active on social media because I literally lost my nan just as that movement started. So I wasn't that active on social media, but I remember seeing and following a lot of people who were active. And it was just like, for me, it felt like I have an awareness of these things, and I want to have the conversations, like obviously when I was in the space too with people around me. But that for me wasn't my arena to get pulled into it, because there's people out there who have lived experiences of that and feel passionate about that, and, you know, will fight the corner and be the voice in the realms of social media. So for me, I just like pulled back from that. But I think with this, everything that we've seen this week, I don't know, it felt draining, but it didn't also, because it felt like I was stepping into something that I was very confident to talk about, that actually didn't consume me that much, if that makes sense. And people's opinions, like that person who was commenting on the post coming in talking about knife crime, that is just like, I think because I've dealt with people like that in a previous job for so long, working with like male offenders, and I've had to obviously sit opposite male domestic violence perps and men who's murdered women and all of that stuff, I just can shut down and just understand that you have no idea, and you don't even want to know, so I'm not even entertaining it. And I also, in a bizarre way, get like a little bit of enjoyment from that. You know what I mean? Get a little bit of enjoyment from like the back and forth with those types of people, because I'm just like, I don't mean to sound patronizing, but I am smarter than you on this situation. So please bring your opinions my way about how these statistics that I've just pulled out have only came out all of a sudden when the date is 2018 on them. But, you know, you just pulled them out of nowhere. And sometimes you've got to love these conversations with these people.
You've got to love them. You've got to pull. I think we have a God-given right, and it's our place now, like you said, to draw ourselves into situations where we are going to be the voice. The only people that are going to be the voice of this movement are us, like strong, empowered women, and we need to be the voice of the women who might not be able to have the same confidence and power to push themselves forward. I think from the place where I went to, and I think one of my co-founders, so Kira, who also co-founded Arla, is that, you know, as trauma survivors, so we've both gone into this place where we've taken on this activist role, and it's impacted like our relationships, and like there's this point where I take it on in a really heavy heart. I take it on in the sense of like, it's my trauma, and I'm going to fight my trauma for every other woman that's there. And it's not a good place to be in, because it brings everything up, and then I have this thing of like feeling like all of my trauma is now coming to the forefront, and I need to like fight everything to get rid of it. And that's where she was feeling as well, and that's hence why I took a little step back. And that's what you need to do sometimes. I think you have to take that to be like, oh, this is not my trauma, this is someone else. But and then now I feel much better, actually, to be honest. So I'm probably ready to go back into that arena and fight alongside you.
You've got to have the compassion. I sent an email actually yesterday to my mailing list, and I was like, you don't need to have compassion for everything all the time. Like, it doesn't mean you're a bad person, but if you just continue to give your energy to these really sad, because how much of it, we've had a sad year.
Yeah.
If you continue to just give and give and give and give your energy, you are going to just be constantly triggered and exhausted by it. So it's okay. And I think that's something that the listeners should understand, is like, it's okay to turn off the news if they're talking about something that's sad, or, you know, they're talking about COVID. It doesn't mean that you don't care. It just means that you might be fatigued and you can't give all of yourself all the time to these things. Have you found that that's quite interesting in terms of being a trauma survivor and seeing all of these things? How does that impact you? I mean, this week's been loaded, but how does that impact you day to day?
So it's like day to day, I guess, with Arla, when I'm around, like the trauma that I see kind of every day from women, there's two different areas to it. So obviously, like I said, this week has been like unbelievably like loaded, and it only just reaffirmed how much of like a fight I want to give to make sure that yet another woman does not suffer in the same way that, you know, 1 in 3 women have experienced abuse, trauma, discrimination, and now there's another woman that's been murdered, and she lives in Clapham, which is right next to my house, and I live in Tooting, so it was all very close to home. But I think on the side of fighting the good fight, I am the type of person that I will always use my trauma in a way that I want to have my story to share with other women so they feel empowered to come forward. So on a day-to-day basis, that's the reason why I wanted Arla. So I wanted to, basically with Arla, I wanted the stories to be able to come out so that other women could feel like they are able to share their story. And on a day-to-day basis, obviously there's so much in Arla's like aura, there is so much trauma that comes out, and there's been times where I've read stories and I've just broken down and cried because I just physically feel like I go back to a place, which can be really difficult. But then we have these coaches like yourself, where when I'm reading how you are communicating across the platform to the trauma survivors and giving off this energy and vibe where I feel like I can do anything and keep going, it gives me that sense of like pride and empowerment to like just keep going another day, because there's just so many incredible like strong women out there.
Yeah, so strong. And I think something that you just said then about it feeling close to home, I mean, I've not experienced trauma, but I think one of the reasons why I would say so good at working with people with trauma is because I think it is in relation to past jobs. And, you know, you can be quite naive just as an individual, but I think as a woman you can be quite naive. Like, I know women around me, like my mum and stuff, will just leave windows open and all of these things, and because I've seen it firsthand, I've seen how quick it happens, I've seen how it's just women like me going about the business who can just so easily, their life can be changed. And for me, it's felt like at some point so suffocating because it's that close. It gives me like this different insight, I think, to work with women who have experienced trauma. So I think that's probably this week what's been the ripple effect of what's happened, is I feel like it's just gone woomph and it's come so close to everybody, and they're like, oh my God, that could be me. Like, she was just walking home. So tell us a little bit. I mean, obviously I know about it, but tell the listeners a little bit about I Am Arla, because it's incredible, the platform, and it's doing amazing things.
Yeah, thank you. So it wouldn't be I Am Arla without people like you, but it's basically a platform that was started as a place for women to share their stories. Specifically, the way that it started was that I shared my story with my friend Laura, that I'd been in an abusive relationship, a domestic violent relationship from the age of 18 to 22. And it just so happened when I shared my story with her that she had also been in the same domestic violent relationship with a friend of the guy that I was with. So they were two friends, and they worked we worked in the same sort of area. And I think that moment of just connecting and sharing that story, I had felt that burden of that story, and the shame of my domestic abuse had stayed with me for so many years. Unfortunately, because I never shared it with anyone, because I was so ashamed of it, I kept going into a cycle of abuse. So I ended up dating another guy that was abusive, another guy who was abusive, raped me. And then my last relationship before my healthy one now, he was emotionally abusive. So it was just an endless cycle of abuse that I couldn't get out of. And I think it was because I just never was able to share my story and feel connected to anyone. And in some ways I wasn't able to free myself from the trauma and the abuse. So the platform was specifically created for a space for women to do that sharing, so they can then feel connected to other women, and not feel so alone and not feel so shameful. And hopefully through that connection of the storytelling, you can find some relations and find some kind of connectivity of a way to heal, which someone might have gone through the same story. It's now then moving into a platform where we want to provide like coaching and resources and events and everything that you might need to get yourself as a trauma survivor from where you might feel really lost and lonely to being thriving and kind of getting your power back and your control back, whatever that might look like. So yeah, it's an amazing feeling, just feeling like my trauma is hopefully helping other women as my, like, yeah, that's where they feel.
Yeah, and I think that's why you are like such a big inspiration. Like even for me, I've not experienced trauma, but just seeing somebody come out the other side of it and create something and continuously be in that space of healing of the trauma just to make an impact is like really amazing. And I think there is power in women coming together, because it's when I do my programs, the connection that's formed between women on the program, and they don't know each other and they think they're the only person going through, nobody else understands. And by week like 3, they're all talking about their traumas and triggers and, you know, how they feel about the body and everything and anything, and they're all supporting each other. And it just makes me feel like sometimes I just sit on the call and, you know, when you just feel, you probably get this, where you just feel like overwhelmed with gratitude that you can just bring this together to happen. And you just hear them say like, oh, I thought I was the only one who's ever felt like that, or I never ever thought anybody would understand me. And I'm like, yeah, we do. Like there's women out there who feel the same experience, the same, but we just feel so much shame, like you said, around things that we've been through, especially women who've been through trauma. And I think that's a big emotion attached to it.
Yeah, it's hugely isolating, and it's just you do feel a lot of embarrassment just because it's a topic that people don't talk about. But I think as soon as we start to unsilence it is when we'll start to have conversations where things will actually change. And it's just incredible, like from founding and bringing this kind of community in Arla together. Like my now co-founders, so Kira, she was a rape survivor, so she brings her story of like, you know, experiencing rape, and now she's kind of changed her career and become an activist really to try and support other women in legislation around rape. And then Lucy, who's a life coach and a psychology trained, I can't say that word, psychological trained NHS coach, get tongue twisters. So she brings that kind of coaching experience. And then to have the coaches on the platform like yourself just gives that women access to really feeling like they're not alone. They've got this like bubble of expertise that they can access when they need it. So in that moment of that trauma, it kind of picks you up like your big sister would and protects you in a way that you might not have had. And I think that's the beauty of what we've all created for these women that have experienced trauma. So I think hopefully we can go on to like do some incredible thing, especially with people like women like you on there.
Yeah, we're going to take care of the world.
You definitely are.
So just before you go, tell us, you know, you sent me over and I voice noted you that you were like my inspiration because you've been on Forbes 30 under 30. So I have to know the story about it before you go.
Well, I'm not rich, if that's the question.
I just think it's amazing that you were on that in Forbes. That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, no. So Forbes was, I got on the list when I was 28 years old, from the company that I founded. So I founded that care company, and I founded the company on the back of actually caring for my grandma, she was like my second mum. I know you were really close to your grandma as well. And I cared for her from the age of 10 till I was about 21 years old. She had dementia, epilepsy, schizophrenia. And I just found we really struggled to get carers in. So it became like a job outside of all my normal growing up. And on the back of that, I basically founded a company, which is a tech company called Vida, which basically connected carers to the elderly or disabled using an app. So I founded that when I was 26. I'm now 31. And I raised money. I raised £6 million, built the technology platform, and delivered over 350,000 hours of care in 2 years, which was incredible. And then Forbes basically recognized me, Forbes 30, as a female founder that was doing amazing things. And sadly, and this is a story probably for another podcast or when you come on our live, I got sexually harassed by some investors, and I got bullied out of my company.
No.
And so therefore, I know exactly what it feels like to go, this is why this is such an important thing for me. But it was a story that has really made a huge impact on me. And that was 3 years ago. So yeah, that was the story of Vida and Forbes.
Oh wow, yeah, I want to know the other half of that.
Stay tuned, part 2.
Part 2. Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, it is, especially for someone who's 20. I was 20, obviously 26 when I started it, and 29 when I went through a big court case around sexual harassment and bullying. And it obviously, like I said, male investors. I was gagged for a while, so I couldn't talk about it in the sense of I had a gagging clause. But it was one of the most harrowing things I've ever been through. I was suicidal at times because it was just so heartbreaking to have something taken away that I'd built for reasons that were misogyny, greed. And it's really funny because obviously having these accolades like Forbes 30 and the other day I did a post around my face was in Times Square for International Women's Day, for the United Nations, and there was all these things that were going on in the front, and in the back was just terrible discrimination for being a woman, for being a founder. And so it just goes to show stuff like this is inherent, and even when you do speak up, which is what I try to do, it becomes another piece of the story that's your fish and chip paper the next day. And sadly, it becomes something that of the past and nothing changes. So hopefully this is going to make a huge change with this movement.
Hopefully with the company that you've got now.
Thank you.
Because it's so good. So where can people find you if they're wanting to follow you on social media?
So yeah, give us a follow at I am Arla. So that will be on Instagram. So that's iam.arla. I am Devika.Wood. But if you want any kind of advice, or you have experienced anything, or anything that we've talked about has obviously triggered you and you need any support, Lydia is your girl, other coaches on the platform. And yeah, feel free to come over and we'll join our community.
Fabulous. And then we've got a live. So this is going on tomorrow, and then we've got a live on Thursday. So people can come and find us there for a chat, which is quite nice. Thank you so much for joining me. I know it was last minute. I literally sprung it on you yesterday, but I couldn't think of anybody else better to have the conversation with. So thank you for giving me your evening.
Thanks for having me. Lots of love.
So thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And if you are triggered by anything, I've put some places you can go for support in the show notes, and also you can reach out to myself or Devika, or you can head over to the I am Arla Instagram. For those who aren't aware of what my platform handle is, it's at selflovelydia. And I just want to say thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for just coming into this space and listening to the conversations that I'm having on my podcast. It means the world. So if you did enjoy this episode, please download, please share, please leave a review if you can. It is all appreciated so much. And I hope you are taking some time for yourself, and I hope you are looking after your mental, physical and spiritual health. So I shall speak to you all soon. Bye.